Yeah, I think there have been lots of those moments. And I do think that we say things kind of glibly in the world of pathology. We say every slide's a patient and everybody nods in agreement. But we don't really make decisions and behave in ways that kind of speak to that as our truth. But one of the experiences that really affected me pretty deeply was we formed our Patient and Families Advisory Council in July of 2016. And kind of the foundation of a patient and family advisory council are having patient and family advisors. It took us a while to understand how that works. I think initially we thought their job was to listen to us and nod in agreement when we had what we thought were great ideas. And eventually we understood that it was the other way around, that
Uh,
they should be driving the bus and we should be learning from them what matters to our patients.
Welcome to the People of Pathology podcast. I'm Dennis Strank. On this podcast, we explore pathology one story at a time and connect with the people behind the diagnosis. What happens when a pathologist starts asking not only what is the diagnosis, but also how does the patient experience it? Dr. Jeff Myers has spent his career pushing the boundaries of traditional pathology, bridging the gap between the lab and the lives behind the specimens. We'll explore his work in patient-centered pathology that is helping to reshape the culture of the field. All right, here's Dr. Jeff Myers. I've read some of the articles that you've written, and some things have been written about you. And in one of them, you described your path to pathology as kind of a shift from wanting to be a social worker to becoming a pathologist. And I'm curious about, what was it about pathology that resonated with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before I went to college, I left high school early. I was a not very good amateur musician in a very good band, good because of the other musicians. And I thought, well, I don't think I thought much about it. I just figured that's what I would do. I fell in love, and she was in college locally. And I would find that when I visited the campus, I liked the atmosphere. And so I quit the band because I couldn't do both. And I had to get a job. And my interest was social work because that was a field in which my father was involved. And I loved the way that he was serving people. My job was at a local hospital in Fargo, North Dakota, a small hospital and clinic called Dakota Clinic at that time. I think it's been renamed. And they had a single pathologist. His name was Jack Spear. And Jack was an immigrant from Heidelberg, Germany. He came in the late 30s to escape the Nazis. He was Jewish. And I think he'd been waiting for someone like me to show up when I was asked to do autopsies. I was an orderly based in the ER. And when they first asked me if I was willing to help with autopsies, I said no. And they said, we'll pay you $50 an autopsy. And I said, yes. And Jack, from the moment I arrived, treated me like a medical student, or so I imagined,
Okay.
teaching me about the heart, teaching me about things I never knew about. And I was smitten. And I got to hang out in the gross room and watch him gross things. I got to hang out in his office, and I was astounded at the number of physicians that came by to seek his advice. And I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And so I decided that I wanted to be a pathologist. Now, I was incredibly naive. I'm the first child of four to do college. My parents were supportive, but they were not college educated themselves. So none of us knew how this worked. So in Fargo, Moorhead is the community across the river in Minnesota. There were 3 schools of higher learning. And I just learned which one had the highest rates of acceptance to medical schools. It was Concordia College in Moorhead, a small private college. So I went there. I didn't know about the medical school application process. I didn't hang out much with other students because I was working about 36 hours a week as an orderly, evenings and weekends. So when it came time to apply to medical school, I applied to one, the University of North Dakota, because that's where I lived. And I thought that's what you did. They deferred my application at first because I told them I wanted to be a pathologist, which I learned in retrospect was not what they wanted to hear. I went there for 2 years. At that time, about a third of the students continued to use it as a 2-year school and transferred to other medical schools for their last 2 clinical years. And I was one of those students, and I went to WashU because by then the pathologist at the Dakota Clinic was a guy named Les Torgerson. Jack retired, and Les was amazing. He was inspirational to me. I remember one day sitting in his office, and he was dictating a letter to Dave Darlene at the Mayo Clinic. He was sending him a bone tumor, and I didn't really understand that. I asked, why do you send cases to other pathologists? He said, well, I'm by myself, and I don't know enough to serve all of these patients. So I wanted to go to WashU because that's where he went. I stayed there for my residency, and pathology is all that I've ever wanted to do since then.
Okay, that's interesting. So you mentioned that going into medical school, the fact that you wanted to go into pathology was kind of looked down on, right?
Yeah, I mean, the University of North Dakota, for very good reasons, was serving the primary care needs of the state. And
Okay.
at that time, they interviewed 3 medical students at a time. And the other 2 that sat in the room with me both said they wanted to be primary care docs and work in rural North Dakota. Maybe they didn't. In my exit interview with the dean, when I left North Dakota to go to WashU, she was kind of something else. She was very plain spoken. And it turns out, I didn't know it at the time, her father was a dean at the University of Michigan.
Oh,
So in my exit interview, she said, why the hell didn't you cut your hair? And why did you tell the committee you wanted to be a pathologist? And I said, well, because that was the answer. That's what I wanted to be. She said, yeah, but you should have lied like everybody else.
okay.
And I thought, okay, lesson learned, but I'm not good at that.
Right. That's a good lesson, I guess. All right. So throughout your career, you've worn many, let's call them hats, right? Pathologist, educator, administrator, even a book editor. And I'm curious, of these roles, which one do you think has kind of shaped you as a person the most?
No question being a pathologist.
Okay.
It's my greatest source of joy. I love looking at cases. I think histology is magical. We're privileged to know things before anybody else does, and they're important things. We get to interact with colleagues across a variety of domains, surgeons, internists, radiologists, everybody, and I enjoy that. And the latter half of my career, much of my work was in the form of consultations, and I loved speaking to other pathologists and building relationship and making a difference and learning. Seeing cases is my greatest form of CME. So I think being a pathologist, I view myself in many respects as a failed educator. I do like to educate, but I don't think it's my strength. And I have enjoyed my administrative roles. I mean, I don't enjoy everything about them, but I like creating the future rather than having it imposed upon me. And I feel that's hard to do if you aren't in a leadership role.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Now, you spent 16 years at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota and then made the move to University of Michigan. So can you tell me what brought you to Mayo in the first place?
There was a pathologist there at the time by the name of Tom Colby, probably the world's most famous pulmonary pathologist, who I greatly admired. At that time, I was junior faculty at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I went there as a fellow to join my mentor, with whom I crossed paths at WashU, Ada Louise Katzenstein, who really is singularly responsible for my career path. And so I followed her to Birmingham, finished my fellowship, and stayed on faculty and was having the time of my life. It was a great time. Her husband, Mike Mazur, was director of anatomic pathology. Eventually, I think he was great. We were friends. It was awesome. There was some political turmoil bubbling there at the time that Tom asked if I wanted to have lunch at a USCAP meeting, and he talked to me about the Mayo Clinic and said that they were interested in me. So I went, I interviewed. It was very impressive, but I didn't want to leave where I was. I have a strong sense of loyalty, and I loved my mentor and I loved working with her, and I didn't want to move. 6 months later, our chair at UAB was fired. The process was kind of ugly, and nasty things were said about me and others by colleagues whom I trusted. When my chair was fired, I was called to a meeting, and it was explained that we didn't need any of that, and we hope you stay. And by then, it felt like leaving was a good idea. Someone must have known that at the Mayo Clinic, because they called me again and said, well, you have one more shot. Take it or leave it. And I took it.
Isn't that interesting? Because this kind of thing happened to me once. It's kind of interesting how right when you're at the point where you need a change, the change comes. You know what I mean? That's an interesting thing. And you knew enough to take it.
Yeah, and it was the smartest decision I've ever made, and that's probably a pretty low bar, but were wonderful years. I loved my time at the Mayo Clinic. And Tom Colby had the same influence on my career as Anna did. I mean, they were something else. And it was a real privilege for me.
Yeah, that's another important thing too, these mentors that we meet along the way that
Yeah,
kind of shape who we are.
no question.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so what was it that brought you to Michigan then?
I think I had reached a point in my life and my career. I was 50 years old. And part of me was wondering, was this all there is? I mean, it was great. Certainly could have stayed, but I was restless. I wouldn't leave for just any place. I looked at a few opportunities and passed. But when Michigan came along, I knew some of their faculty through my roles at the USCAP, and I liked them. That doesn't necessarily tell you about the place. They had a new chair. His name is Jay Hess. He's now dean of the medical school at Indiana University. And he really impressed me in a variety of ways, not the least of which was he knew some folks in anatomic pathology pretty well, folks like Mark Wick and Virginia Labolsi, and he compiled a list of what he felt were the strongest candidates for the job. And I was one of them. We all had the same sort of interview, not at the same time. And he called me and said, well, we finished and you've emerged as our candidate, but I don't want you to come back for a second visit, which seemed like an odd thing to say.
Yeah.
He said, because I think if you were to decide not to come, that would not be good for morale here. So he said, I'm going to come to you. He said, I've been a student of some of the things that go wrong between department chairs and directors of anatomic pathology. And I think it's really about misunderstandings regarding expectations. So he said, I want to know what yours are, and I want you to know what mine are. So he flew to Rochester, Minnesota. We met in a conference room at the Rochester airport. I didn't even know they had one.
Mm.
And we had a great conversation, and I thought it was brilliant that he did it this way. What were the things that he said and that I saw that interested me? I know that Mayo is a privileged place. It is a very special place. But I also know that most of the rest of the world is not like the Mayo Clinic. And I wanted to see the world of pathology and patient care from kind of a different place. And I'll be honest, I also had always wanted to live in a college town. And Rochester is a lot of things, but it's not that. And I wanted to understand what pathology looked like in a large university with significant investments in both basic and translational research and opportunities to collaborate outside of the medical domain, a place with a top 10 business school and a top 10 college of engineering and a school of art and design and a college of dentistry. I wanted to know what that might mean for how we think of our future.
Okay.
And I will say that over the last almost 20 years, we've done collaborative projects with every one of those colleges, and it's been a blast. I remember when I was leaving Mayo, some people were kind of angry with me and felt that I had been disingenuous in saying that I loved the Mayo Clinic. And I remember a colleague coming into my office and saying, what makes you think the University of Michigan is better than the Mayo Clinic? And I responded, what makes you think that I think the University of Michigan is better than the clinic? It's not the driver. I'm not looking for a better place. I'm looking for a different place. Just because life is short, and I want to see it from multiple places on the globe.
Okay. I like that. That's an interesting perspective. You've talked about in other places how easy it is in pathology to lose sight of the why, right? The patient or your purpose, I guess. And I've thought about this a lot after I've read that because that's true. I mean, I'm a PA and we're well removed from the patient so that it is easy to, I don't want to say forget, but maybe not keep in mind that there's a patient attached to that specimen. And I wonder throughout your career, as you're thinking about the why and maybe you're not really connected to it, are there moments in there that really help you refocus on that?
Yeah, I think there have been lots of those moments. And I do think that we say things kind of glibly in the world of pathology. We say every slide's a patient and everybody nods in agreement. But we don't really make decisions and behave in ways that kind of speak to that as our truth. One of the experiences that really affected me pretty deeply was we formed our Patient and Families Advisory Council in July of 2016. And kind of the foundation of a patient and family advisory council are having patient and family advisors. It took us a while to understand how that works. I think initially we thought their job was to listen to us and nod in agreement when we had what we thought were great ideas. And eventually we understood that it was the other way around, that
Uh,
they should be driving the bus and we should be learning from them what matters to our patients. And one of those initial inaugural patient and family advisors was a guy named Dennis, a very charismatic guy, a local restaurant owner from Greece, very colorful, well known in the cancer center, where he had been treated for esophageal carcinoma of relatively advanced stage. And as a 7-year survivor, he would always describe himself as a miracle. In fact, I remember being on a panel together during our quality week here and him talking about himself as a miracle and talking about how he never knew about pathology, that when his surgeon said he had to go back and take more margin because the original one was positive, he thought the surgeon just knew that somehow. And he said once he got to know who we were and what we did, he now understood pathology to be the most important part of his cancer journey. What I remember about Dennis in particular is that it was actually just a few days after that panel, he called me and he said, "Well, my cancer's back." He said, "I had an appointment the afternoon of our morning panel and it's in my bones." He said, "They're going to do a biopsy and I want to see it." So they did, and it was back. And we looked at it together along with his wife. And he said, "Well, I appreciate that." Uh, but he taught me something in that moment pretty valuable. And I'm likely to get emotional because I'm emotional at baseline. But he said, "I tire of everybody talking about cancer survivors as the heroes." He said, "Because we're heroes too."
wow, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Can we talk about the creating the Patient and Family Advisory Council?
Sure.
You mentioned that was in 2016. What was kind of the inspiration for this?
Well, we had started a project that was unrelated to that.
Okay.
Um, we eventually called it the Michigan Innovative Personalized Patient-Centered Pathology Project. And the only reason it was called that was because we needed a snappy acronym. Because on this campus, if you don't have a snappy acronym, you're not really very valid.
Okay.
And that gave us the acronym of MyP3. The other thing about our campus is that prostate cancer is a very big deal. It's really the founding driver for the Michigan Center of Translational Pathology. And so when we first started using the acronym, people frequently would ask, "Is that a new prostate cancer test?" And we would say no. But it really started as a leadership development project. It grew out of my concern that if I were hit by a bus in those days, I don't know who would carry on the work that I think was transforming our culture and was important. And I think we sometimes take kind of a weird pedestrian view of succession planning and what that looks like. So I wanted to think about it differently. And so the idea was to engage all of those in physicians and staff in leadership or management roles, and together kind of learn more about who we were and what it meant to lead. We worked with an outside consultant. His name is Brian Toll. And as that project matured, Brian challenged each of us to write a vision, a story that would reflect our vision for what pathology would be in, I believe, 10 years. So each of us did. Then we had to read what we wrote at our next session together. And it was astounding because we all wrote very similar things. And what was similar about them is that they all spoke to our relationship with patients. And they all had us working more directly with patients. I think most pathologists will tell you they serve the needs of providers, which is true. And that's part of the way we distance ourselves from patients. So that was really striking. Like, wow, we're all thinking about that. So we thought, well, the rest of the division of anatomic pathology, which was my sphere of influence at that time, will think we're nuts, right? Because we've been talking to each other for a year and it isn't clear that this has any kind of basis in anybody else's reality. So we synthesized those stories into a single story, and two of us at a time would meet with individuals at staff and faculty levels, share the story in advance and kind of learn what do you think? They all said, yeah, I love this. This is what I want to sign up for. So we brought that to one of our quarterly all staff, all trainee, all student, all faculty quality meetings. The group of 18 leaders and managers on the stage, and we opened the session by listening to two patient stories. One delivered by one of us, who is a breast cancer survivor, and one actually done remotely on a big screen to tap a patient in the Chicagoland area who had come to the University of Michigan for her lung cancer treatment. And when she did that, she had reached out to me incredulous that her itinerary did not include an appointment with a pathologist, on which she insisted. And so I had met with her. So I knew what some of her views were about pathology. And actually, that meeting changed everything in her cancer care. What it led to was a re-review of her materials and recognition that she didn't have cancer. So it's pretty important.
Wow.
So we opened the meeting with their stories. And then we talked about the vision, and we talked about a plan to have multiple small group meetings, not to hear whether they liked our plan, but to hear what their plans might be. So we scheduled those meetings. All of them were facilitated by Brian Toll and attended by members of our 18-person leadership group.
Okay.
We said attendance was mandatory, but I said that knowing that I had no enforcement arm. I don't have a badge or a gun, and people would either come or they wouldn't. We had a list of 217 staff, faculty, and trainees to whom we extended mandatory invitations. And remarkably, 211 showed up over the course of 20 small group meetings.
Wow.
And they were astounding because the thing that I heard the most, every group, because I went to all of them, was patients need to stay at the center of everything we do. And I would not have predicted that message, I'll be honest. We heard some other important messages that we distilled down to 6 themes after we had completed and digested all of the meetings. And at our next quarterly quality meeting, we fed those themes back and asked, did we hear you? And the response was, you did, but we don't even get where to start. So we used the analogy of walking on a bridge while you build it and said, we'll do this in baby steps, little projects to chip away at all of the work that needs to be done. They were projects like a pathology clinic in our multidisciplinary weekly lymphoma clinic that was run by Lauren Smith, one of our hematopathologists. The oncologists loved it so much that before we knew how to sustain it, they had a video on their webpage for the cancer center advertising appointments with pathologists for their lymphoma patients. Actually, we couldn't sustain the pilot, so that didn't become a thing. We did things like work with the School of Social Work to put social workers at the medical examiner's office in Wayne County, which is Detroit, to counsel bereaved families. So we were starting to run these experiments. Along the way, we read a book by one of our administrators at Michigan Medicine. Her name's Linda Laren. And it was a book in which she compiled stories from physicians, nurses, staff about patient encounters. And we thought it was really riveting. And so we wanted to chat with her. She came. She started telling us about patient and family-centered care. We hadn't really heard much about it. We knew it was an area of institutional investment. But we realized what we were doing was patient and family-centered care. So I met with Molly White, who was in charge of the adult side of the patient and family-centered care program for Michigan Medicine. And she said, yeah, what you're doing is patient and family-centered care. And so we started to learn, well, at a tactical level, like, what does that look like? And she told her the most common kind of tactical piece of that was a patient and families advisory council. She came and talked to us about kind of best practices, probably no bigger than 11 or 12 people, and talked about cadence of meetings and the sort of work on which you focus. And then we ignored all of the rules. We thought, well, if we open the doors to everybody who wants to participate, we'll probably be lucky to get 12. It is, after all, a department of pathology. We got 42.
Wow.
We took 22 of them to a 2.5-day intensive workshop offered by the Institute for Patient and Family Centered Care. It was in San Antonio at that time. We were really proud to be there. The organizers said they've been running these meetings for over 20 years. This is the first time pathology ever showed up. They said we were the largest group in an enrollment of 272 attendees. And the way that workshop worked was you were attached to a liaison who helped you navigate kind of the work. And our liaison was a family practitioner from Wisconsin. I remember what he said to me when the workshop was over. He said, "This was so amazing." He said, my first meeting when I get home is going to be with the chair of the Department of Pathology at the University of Wisconsin and ask them why the hell they don't have Patient and Family Advisory Council." So that's how it started.
So then I guess as far as like time frame, like as far as this is when it got started, how long did it take before it was kind of, I don't, self-sustaining, maybe functional, if that makes sense?
Well, I would say it took at least a year,
Okay.
and everything's been set back by the pandemic. It all blew up.
Of course.
We still exist. We are finding our way back with a current focus on pathology clinics. So in March of this year, we launched a pathology clinic in the Cancer Center focused on diseases of the breast. And one of our focuses has been on understanding how to make these things sustainable. And I'm pretty worried about that. We hear a lot about pathology clinics these days.
Yep.
I've worked with many of the folks who are running successful pathology clinics in a project that I did with the ASCP. And they're all kind of similar stories. They're there because someone championed it. And those champions are amazing, but they're mortal. And they will retire or they'll die. And what I've tried to understand is what happens then. I don't think anybody's really figured out the financial model, which is the most common question I'm asked when I talk about these things. Well, how are we going to pay for it? And
Right.
I remind them that that isn't how innovation works. Innovation works by first having an idea and understanding its value, and understanding that if it has value, you'll have to pay for it. And that's kind of the last question, not the first. Because if you always start there, you'll never innovate, right? Because they're always scary. So it's understandable and valid to ask, how are we going to pay for this? My answer is, I'm not sure. But I think we'll have to be far more creative than simply using RVUs and reimbursement rates to figure out whether it's comparable to sitting a pathologist in front of a microscope, because it's not the same
Right.
when measured that way. So we'll have to think about things that matter to decision makers who allocate resources. So does it do anything in terms of patients' willingness to recommend? Because that matters to our executive leaders. Does it impact access if you can shorten the appointment times for other providers involved in the patient's care because they're no longer burdened with teaching them about pathology? It's interesting. The second most common expression of concern I hear from pathologists is, but I'm not a surgeon. What if they ask me about their surgery? And I say, I don't know. I'd tell them I'm not a surgeon. But as it stands, when they ask their surgeon about pathology, they pretend they are one. And
Right.
if you talk to surgeons about that, they're uncomfortable. They're a little uncomfortable with us talking to their patients about pathology too, but you can navigate that. And I know of at least one practice in the Chicagoland area where pathology clinics have shortened follow-up appointment times for their surgeons. If you create greater access for surgeons, there are dollar signs attached to that are a fair way to value what you bring to the table. So I think figuring out how to make pathology clinics sustainable beyond the volunteerism of champions is a tough problem, but it's the last problem to solve, not the first one.
That's very interesting. I like that a lot. This is the People of Pathology podcast with our guest, Dr. Jeff Myers. We'll be right back. Are you thinking about applying to a pathologist assistance program and feeling a little lost? That's why I created the Path to PathA, your PA school application blueprint. This is a step-by-step prep course that gives you everything you need for a strong application. From finding shadowing to writing a standout personal statement to prepping for interviews, this course was made to help you feel informed, confident, and ready. Visit www.thepath2patha.com to join the mailing list. You'll be the first to hear when the course launches. Your path starts here. LabVine is an interactive online learning platform where laboratory professionals learn, develop, and discover by sharing knowledge and building on each other's experience. The platform provides global access to internationally accredited laboratory-specific courses and other resources developed by lab specialists like us for the laboratory industry. LabVine is free to sign up, and you can use the link in the show notes to get started. Now for the rest of my conversation with Dr. Jeff Myers on the People of Pathology podcast. All right, one of the most common questions, people think pathologists and people, like that doesn't go together for a lot of people. Like, how do you answer that?
Well, I think it's naive. I hear that a lot. But in work that Catherine Lapidus, a member of our faculty, has done, the enthusiasm among pathologists for pathology clinics exceeds that of patients and non-pathology providers. Pathologists are up to the task. And we talk about concern about pathologist communication skills as if all other non-pathologists are good at it. And any one of us who's been to see a doctor knows that isn't actually true. Some of them are really terrible at it.
Yeah.
And I imagine we're the same. But all of the data from pathology clinics, which is mostly in the form of surveys, is extremely positive. Pathologists are actually pretty good at this. I remember, and I think we have to be strategic about the opportunities we identify. I remember hearing from a family about a youngest daughter who was coming to our institution for surgery for her lung tumor.
Okay.
My connection to that family was through the patient's sister, who was a Mayo-trained physician. And I said, I'm happy to help. I didn't hear from them until the day of surgery, and they called me early in the morning when I'm always here, or I was.
Right.
And I said, look, why don't I come over? It sounds like you're anxious. So I went to talk to the family outside the pre-op area in our cardiovascular center, and they were pretty anxious. And in listening to them, I said, well, it sounds like your sister's really anxious. And they said, yes, she really is. And I asked, how do you think she would feel if I went into the pre-op area to chat with her? And they said, well, she would love it. So I did. And I talked to her, and she was understandably nervous. She appreciated having some of her questions answered, and I appreciated the opportunity to kind of level set expectations. I mean, if you think about it, it turns out that for her kind of tumor, frozen sections are really important. It's a tumor where knowing where the margins are can be very challenging for the surgeon. So getting free margins is heavily dependent on frozens. And I was able to set expectations by saying, we will play a role while you're asleep, and that's in kind of assessing the margins. And I said, we're pretty good at it. We're not perfect. We don't always get it right, but we mostly do. And I'll do them myself. I'll keep your family informed if I do that with your permission. She said, oh, that would be so great. I'm so relieved. When I was leaving, the nurse in the pre-op area came up to me and said, why don't you do that for every patient? And I thought, that's a great question. Why don't we? Yeah. So I contacted the surgeon, said, look, I've talked to the family. Okay with you if I do the frozens? I wasn't scheduled. And he said, yeah, that'd be great. So turns out it took multiple resections to get a free margin. At the end of that, he said, listen, would you mind going to talk to the family? Let them know it's going to be about another hour. She's doing great and everything's gone well. So I'd be happy to. I did. And it turned out the family was amazing. Turns out dad was a physician. Turns out he had been at the University of Michigan as a trainee. And it turns out that mom used to work here. And that's where they met. She was in our department. As we were talking on a Thursday, mom then asked, when will we have a result? When will we know if you were right? And I said, well, and her husband interrupted my response and said, honey, pathology won't have a report for days. And I said, that's actually not true. You'll have a report tomorrow, and I can bring it to you with pictures if you want. And they said, yeah, that'd be awesome.
Wow.
So I did. And the picture, sister was pretty groggy, but doing okay. Several weeks later, I don't remember how many, my administrative partner called me and said, "There's a family here to see you. What should I do?" And I thought, that's such a weird question that would only happen in pathology. I said, "Well, you should let him in.
Uh-huh.
I'm happy to talk to him." And it was this family. And they said,
Oh, wow.
"Our experience with pathology was the best doctor's appointment we had in our care journey. And we're going to tell all of our friends who need thoracic surgery that they should go to the University of Michigan." Now, that's the sort of outcome
Yep.
that matters, right?
Yep.
So somebody might say, "Well, you didn't even get paid for that time." And, the response is, "So what?"
Right.
It was the best part of my day. And to anybody who would want to say to me, "Well, I wish I had that kind of time," because I've heard that response,
Sure.
I respond, "You're not here when I turn on the lights in the morning, and you're not here when I turn them off." Doing the right thing is a choice and has nothing to do with what you're getting paid. Now, making it sustainable means you have to have a business model. I get that.
Right.
Well, if you're trying to kind of get to proof of concept, you got to make some investments.
Yeah. Yeah. That story alone is pretty good proof. That's got to feel so rewarding for you. I can't think of a better word. Rewarding
Oh,
just
yeah, it was
getting covered.
amazing.
Yeah. Just you've made that much of a difference in that entire family.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it was fun.
Right.
Like who gets such a privilege, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that was amazing to me. I
Sure.
couldn't have imagined a better way to spend my time than the way I spent it.
This has to appeal to your social work background.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm here to serve people, and that's what drives me, and that's what matters to me. And I think that's true in any of my roles, whether as pathologist, administrator, educator. That's my job, is to serve others.
I wanted to kind of get into that a little bit because you've led some other innovations at Michigan, redesigning the lab with lean design and your division of quality and health improvement. How do you keep those things connected to the patient? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think they're all connected, to be honest. I mean, you reference our design project. When I came to Michigan, the offer letter I signed on October 1st, 2005 said that pathology would have a new building, told me where it would be. It was a comprehensive solution to our space problem. And that project actually never happened. It failed at the budget stage, and that would happen at least 3 more times, really 4. Somewhere along that path, the medical school bought the old Pfizer campus. I think about 140 plus acres, 40 buildings maybe, and it was right next to the North Campus. I don't think they didn't have a plan when they bought it. It was a fire sale. And as we were kind of frustrated by our inability to find a facility solution, somebody approached me and said, "What about what came to be known as the North Campus Research Center, NCRC?" And I said, "Absolutely not." And I said that because I thought we were going to have better options.
Okay.
By the time it came around again, it was clear that it was going to be that or nothing. And I think some faculty felt betrayed. You said we wouldn't go there. I said, "Well, at the time, I thought we had better options, but we don't. And we either go or we're stuck." And I said, our job is how to make it the most amazing solution ever and be better than we are today. Our goal is not that we don't lose ground. Our goal is that we gain ground on all fronts. So we were the first large lean facilities project led by a brilliant project manager, Christine Baker. And she had a team of lean coaches with expertise in utilization of tools already familiar to us. Our department was very invested in lean principles and tools. In fact, when other medical centers would visit Michigan Medicine to learn about lean, because the institution was kind of becoming famous for its investments in lean, pathology would always be on their itinerary. So we weren't new to lean,
Right.
but nobody had done a large scale lean facilities project. And the basic principle is that the design work is done by the people who do the work, not by architects, right? So you engage lab techs to build labs. How novel is that? When you think you have the right idea, you build prototypes out of cardboard and plywood in warehouses, and you have those techs go to those places and see what they got right and what they might have gotten wrong. Like maybe this sink doesn't really go here, maybe it goes here.
Okay.
And the idea is creating efficiencies and better ways to do the work. For the non-laboratory space, I did not think the goal was efficiency. And the question was, is there a way to think about design when your goal is collaboration and collegiality and creativity? Like, how do you design for that?
Right.
I knew when the first architect showed me the plan that it couldn't possibly be the future of our discipline, right? I mean, here's AP, here's CP, here are the little offices, here are the doors. We were being asked to plan for a 2026 horizon. We knew digital was on that horizon.
Mhm.
And I just looked at it and said, that's not the future. The response I got was, I've been doing this for decades and this is how it's done. And I thought to myself, yeah, I think that's actually the problem.
Ah, okay.
So let's start over. And we did. So we made some site visits, some to other path departments, some to other places in healthcare, and some out of healthcare altogether. Places like software design companies, a school for chefs. We wanted to see how others think about collaboration and opportunities to be creative and how space informs that. And we realized that in many respects, you want the opposite of efficiencies. You want to improve opportunities for unanticipated collisions that might deliver something good. That ultimately led to a very unique design that, so far as we know, doesn't exist elsewhere. And I always said, well, no, we got it right if people are curious. Right? That's not much of a metric, but I believe it to be true.
Okay.
So we built largely transparent, smaller offices around central gathering spaces and built all of those neighborhoods around a large central area we called Central Park. And the idea was to bring people together in a way that their office wouldn't solve all of their space problems, so they had to get out. I remember the design team said, well, we better survey how they spend their time now. And I remember them bringing their spreadsheet to me and saying, I think we're on the wrong track, Dr. Myers. Pathologists, as it turns out, never leave their offices. I said, no, that's actually the problem we're trying to solve. Right? So I get that's our current state, but I don't believe it's our future. And I really thought that subspecialization was driving some of our own polarization. Like we weren't even working with each other anymore or necessarily speaking to each other very often. So I remember when I showed that neighborhood model at a faculty meeting, the assumption was, oh, which is the Durham Path neighborhood? And I said, there is no Durham Path. I don't remember if it was Durham Path who said that, but somebody said something like that. And one of our subspecialists came to my office one day and poked at it and said, you see, you have this all wrong. The person you have next to me is someone I haven't spoken to in 10 years. Why would I want to be next to them? I said, that's actually the problem.
Right.
So we prototyped it as part of where we got to the design. We built a fake neighborhood in space the hospital gave us. It was a prototype, so it was imperfect. The offices didn't have lids, so it was kind of noisy. And we did a 3-month pilot where we ran cohorts of faculty through there just to see if we could learn something about what it was like to work there. We got something like, I can't remember, 172 maybe actionable comments, and we acted on all of them. We learned a lot. And then that's what we built. Was it successful? I think so. Hard to measure. Was everybody happy? Oh, heavens no. Some were really unhappy, but I think we got through that. That was all complicated by a pandemic, a time during which everybody was unhappy for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
But I remember a pathologist saying to me, I was kind of skeptical about this. He said, but I just had a case that normally I would have just crossed, it was a consult. I would have crossed out head and neck and written in neuropathology and said, send this to neuropathology. But I thought, there's a neuropathologist right over there. Maybe I'll just go show her. And he said, I learned something that I never knew before about CMV infections in nerves, I think it was. And he said, I can use that the next time I see that in a consult. He said, so I get the principle. Is that a universal experience? I don't know. It is for me. Even in my retirement, I come in a couple of days a week and I walk around. And I love being able to walk around and see everybody without having to go to the GI neighborhood and the GU neighborhood and we're commingled. And I think that's really the value of diversity. I know DEI's become politicized, but I think when it comes to being creative, diversity has many dimensions. It's not only people who don't look like us or subscribe to the things we subscribe to, but it's people with different life experiences who it's different. It's people who look at different sorts of problems. I remember one of the cohorts we were running through We called it the Innovation Center when we built this prototype neighborhood. And we realized after the first week that pathologists didn't know how to use it. They weren't coming out of their offices. And I thought, well, they need coaching. So we started to coach on, here are ways you might use the common space.
Okay.
You might have coffee together in the morning, just check in with each other. What's on your calendar today or something. So I remember a cohort was kind of experimenting with that. And I was sitting with them at coffee, and it included a person on our faculty with deep domain expertise in placental pathology. And he was sitting with the director of our microbiology lab from CP. And he said, well, I'm working on a project today. I'm looking at placentas from Ghana to understand the impact of malaria. And our director of microbiology said, malaria affects the placenta? And he said, yeah, it does. He said, I didn't know that. They got a project out of that. Like that would have never, ever happened.
Right.
Given the way we used to live. So that was the idea. And that's all about patients, as is the Division for Quality and Health Improvement. That was really an attempt to build a resource that could go beyond the demands of daily operational quality. It wasn't meant to replace the operational quality that happens in our laboratories every day, which from a lean perspective really happens at the level of the bench. It's not something someone can come in and foist upon you or do for you. So this was meant to get to the bigger questions that we were never equipped to address. It worked. I think we've had a lot of successes. When we were struggling with inpatient phlebotomy, like the rest of the world after the pandemic, they worked with others in the institution to develop some very novel solutions, including a novel application where we created a whole new position for basically an air traffic controller for phlebotomists who sits in a room, uses this app to see where the demand is, where the resources are, match them up real time with rapid communication tools. That would have never happened without the Division for Quality and Health Improvement. They're collaborating with our cardiology colleagues in the cardiovascular center, and they built a tool that is very helpful in laboratory utilization for patients with congestive heart failure. That would have never happened without the Division for Quality and Health Improvement. So it was meant to do that sort of work, get to big questions and recognize great opportunities for continuous improvement that were out of reach before.
Okay, interesting. One thing I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned this at the beginning, how you were a musician and you quit the band to go to get a job, go to school. Recently, you've gotten back into music. And this is interesting to me because I've noticed a lot of people I've talked to on this podcast also have some kind of artistic outlet. First of all, why do you think that is? And then tell me about your kind of, the new band that you're in now.
It's a great question. And I think it's not unique to pathology. I think it's true for all of medicine.
Okay.
Most medical centers at which I've worked have some sort of medical center-based symphony or some sort of musical group. I think that's common. It's common to see art shows at which staff, faculty present their work, and some of it is just astounding. And I think there is a connection between the arts and the sciences that is at risk as we you're either STEM or you're something else. And I think that is also an issue of diversity. I think we need to recognize that one can inform the other in ways that matter when it comes to being creative and how we see opportunities. So I think there is a synergy, and I don't think it's unique to pathology. And I think it has to do with the educational pathways that deliver us physicians and something about our life experiences, which are often privileged, afford us the opportunities to do those things. For me, I don't like to dabble in something that I once did well. So when I quit the band, I quit playing guitar at full stop. Like I hadn't touched a guitar in literally decades.
Okay.
And I went to a Jeff Beck concert at the Michigan Theater with my good friend and colleague, Joel Greenson. And as I listened to this amazing musician do things with guitars that nobody else can do, I thought to myself, I should try to play a guitar again. I can afford to buy one, even if I can't play it. So Joel, together with another friend and colleague, Ewell Belize, who's head of our PathA informatics unit, we drove to Elderly Music in Lansing, and they played guitars for me because I couldn't play one. And they said, pick a good guitar
Okay.
and I'll buy it. So they found a Stratocaster they liked, and that worked well for me. And of all things, we bought a Marshall amplifier
Oh,
for
wow.
someone who didn't know how to play guitar. When I got home, I affirmed that I really didn't know how to play. And there was still some muscle memory, which astounded me. My motor skills were not what they were. I have an intention tremor, which gets worse with age, and that gets in the way a little bit.
Mm.
But I started taking lessons, and the three of us started to make bad music together in my basement. And a neighbor who's a very gifted local musician, he's also an attorney, but he plays coffee house type things and plays mostly kind of indie type folk stuff.
Okay.
He stopped me one day and said, "Man, I've been hearing music from your basement." I think I said something like, "Wow, that's kind." And he said, "I've always thought I wouldn't mind singing rock and roll." And I said, "Well, we can't find anybody to sing. That would be great."
Oh,
I asked, "Do you happen to know a drummer?" He said, "I do." He said, "I know a drummer and I have a female singer I can bring with me." And that's how the band was born. So we started practicing in my basement. Our first gig was in the basement. We had a New Year's Eve party on January 2013, I think. Played our little gig. Around that time, or might have been sometime after that, I think my wife was understandably a little frustrated with what I had done in the basement.
mm,
So we ultimately discovered a small property in rural Scioto Township, which is kind of where I live. This little house is on a country road about 10 minutes from my house. It's on 2.5 acres next to barn and some rural looking stuff, complete with horses. And so we converted that through some renovations into a rehearsal and performance venue. And that's where the band moved to. Relatively recently, I think a little over a year ago, Joel Greenson, for reasons of artistic differences,
okay.
left the band. And we'd been working with a very gifted teacher and performer in the area named Alex Johnson. He's just an unbelievable guitar player, and he was really great for our band. He would help us hear things that I don't think other cover bands hear and teach us how to weave that into our covers. And so he's always been part of the band. He's done some gigs with us as a guest artist, but when Joel left, we had a gig coming up, and I asked if he would just step in and kind of be full time with the band until we got through this gig and could figure out a plan. He said he would. When we finished, I approached him with trepidation and said, "Look, you're a professional. We're not." But by the non-pathology musicians in this group are all superb. I mean, they're unbelievable. So just as was true when I was in high school, they make me certainly look much better than I am. But and Alex makes everybody sound like
Right.
it doesn't matter. So I approached him and said, "You're a professional. We're not. This was a temporary thing. Can you help me find another guitar player?" And I said, "That's assuming you don't want to do this anymore." He said, "Actually, I'm having fun. Let's do it."
Okay.
So we now have Alex as a world-class guitar player with years as a studio musician and all kinds of stuff. So we're pretty good.
I mean, that's how you get better, right? You play with musicians who are better than you, right?
Oh yeah, no question about it. It's how you learn pathology too.
Okay. Interesting connection. I like that. I like that a lot. So the band is called Lost in Processing, which is,
It started as a pathology band, and I was thinking a lot about quality, and we were struggling with the issue of how do we ever lose things, and how does Amazon figure this out, et cetera. And so
okay.
when we had to have a name, it just kind of popped up as a good one.
Nice. Okay. Okay. I like that. That's a good story. Okay. So I want to end with this. When you think back about your career, because you recently retired, and so thinking back, not just in terms of what you've accomplished, but in the ways that you've influenced others, what do you hope your legacy will be in the field of pathology?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know that I've thought about it much. I actually abandoned any illusions about legacy a while ago as I watched great pathologists retire or
Mhm.
die, thinking we'll never be the same again. And you do lose something that's irreplaceable. Um,
Yeah.
but from that, I've concluded do what you do not because you believe it will live on or has impact any larger than who you are, but do it because you don't know how not to, because it's your passion, because it's you and your element, and because it's meaningful to you in the moment. Do I hope for? Not much, but when I think about it, what I imagine is that anything I pass along will be funneled through the trainees and colleagues with whom I've interacted. And my hope is that maybe they've learned something from me that touches the next patient and maybe touches the next trainee, and maybe that continues to touch patients in the future. Because I do think that our profession needs a reset when it comes to how we think about how we influence the patient journey. And I actually think our opportunities are substantial to matter in ways that we've not yet imagined.
Interesting. Okay. I like that. That's a very good vision for the future. Dr. Myers, this has been just an amazing conversation. I'm very inspired by the things that you said, and I'm glad I got the opportunity to have you share them with me. So, Dr. Jeff Myers, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and for taking the time.
If you're looking for another episode of the People of Pathology podcast to check out after this one, here's a clip from my interview with Dr. Kene Ojuwu as she talks about her experience of getting pathologists involved in a colorectal cancer prevention health fair.
This was also during the era where I think pathologists were really trying to be more visible, right? So I was in residency at the time, and at that time I had just learned of Dr. Legia Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was exploring this idea of what would it look like if patients saw their own slides. And I stumbled upon her first publication on patients looking at their own slides and how it helped. So I was in a county facility where resources were not as present. So we thought about what does it look like if we took microscopes to a health fair. So what we ended up doing is bringing pathology booths to health fairs and having patients look at, we focused initially on colorectal cancer. So I had them look at a normal biopsy, a tubular adenoma, a TA, and then a cancer. And we had endoscopy pictures that correlated with each of the slides and had that conversation about what is the actual workflow when you go for your colonoscopy, and what is it that we're looking for to diagnose, whether it's just a TA that they got out, so that's great, they caught the precancer versus the actual cancer. And it was received very well. People felt like they learned and they enjoyed the conversation.
You can hear more from Dr. Kene Ojuwu in episode 207. All right, so big thanks to Dr. Jeff Myers. What a powerful message, and some of those stories were really moving. So as we heard, Dr. Myers didn't set out to become a pathologist. His journey began with a calling to serve others, initially through social work. But a powerful mentorship experience and a growing awareness of how pathology could impact patient lives behind the scenes redirected his path toward medicine. That early sense of purpose, rooted in service, continues to influence everything he does today. Over the course of his career, from 16 years at the Mayo Clinic to his leadership roles at the University of Michigan, Dr. Myers has worn many hats: Vice Chair of Clinical Affairs and Quality, diagnostic pathologist, educator, textbook editor, and musician. And in each of these roles, he has remained grounded in a single focus: the impact on the patient. Dr. Myers has a deep commitment to bringing pathologists out of the black box of the lab and into more direct contact with the people they serve. His founding of the pathology-based Patient and Family Advisory Council, one of the first of its kind, helped elevate patient voices in ways that are often missing in pathology. Whether through initiatives like the PFAC or reimagining lab spaces through lean design, Dr. Myers has consistently pushed for a culture that reconnects pathologists with their why. And we discussed how easy it is to lose sight of that why. If I'm being honest, this happens in my work from time to time. It can be difficult to keep that in mind with increasing workloads and other demands on our time. But as Dr. Myers mentioned, it's incredibly important to bring your focus back to the why, to the patient. Even with all of these leadership roles, Dr. Myers still finds the most joy in signing out cases, because that's where he feels the deepest connection to patients. It's a reminder that behind every specimen is a story, a person, someone who deserves empathy and care. Over the last few months, we've had several episodes that highlighted innovations in patient-centered pathology. And we've heard stories about how profoundly patients are affected by this. Dr. Meyer's story is another example of this. Dr. Meyer's legacy may ultimately be measured not just in publications or positions, but in the way he's influenced the culture of pathology to be more patient-centered, collaborative, and purpose-driven. He reminds us that excellence in diagnostics isn't just about accuracy, it's about humanity. As always, I'll have links in the show notes to everything that we talked about today. Don't forget you can follow the show at People of Path on Instagram and Twitter, or just connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you for continuing to share the show with others. Together, let's inspire the next generation of pathologists and laboratory professionals. This show is a member of Health Podcast Network. Thanks for listening. I'm Dennis Strank, and I'll talk to you next time on the People of Pathology podcast.